Hi, Misha here, and those who followed the channel for a while are familiar with this rifle, my Beretta AR70, later named the AR70 223, or specifically this is the S model, the Semi-Auto, and the fact that I really like Italian guns. They just combine quality and practicality. The BM59, the MAB38, the ARX 100/160. But my collection has been missing something until now. A Beretta AR70-90 Semi-Auto. Now, while Beretta did make the AR70-90S semi-automatic for Italy, unfortunately these were not manufactured until the 1990s. So post the 1989 import ban, and really getting into the era of the 94 assault weapons ban, and Beretta themselves never seemed all that interested in semi-automatic rifles. For example, when they did their BM59, the BM69, and the BM62, they were very sporterized. And these AR-70s kind of snuck in the country in small numbers. And quite famously, their boxes were Beretta shotgun boxes. Anyway, even 70-90 kits were hard to obtain until a few years ago when a relatively small quantity popped up. And I picked up a couple, not really knowing what I would do with them. At that time, no one was even doing receivers or barrels. I just sat on them. Then, a gentleman by the name of Troy S. started doing 80% receivers and contracted to have high quality barrels made. So was planning on picking a set up for building, but had a lot going on lately and it kept getting pushed to the back burner. But then early this summer, or late this spring, Chris Bartacci, Small Arms Solutions, called me very excited, saying that he had found an FFL 07 manufacturer, Interfer USA group, that was assembling these using the S receivers and barrels and the parts kits. And as it turns out, the owner is rather familiar with these because not only is he Italian himself, he actually served with the AR-70 and the AR-70-90 in effectively what is Italy's military police. So, I talked about the kit. Let's look at the build and talk about the history. This will be part one, and then very soon we'll get this out to the range. At least, God, I hope so. But for now, yeah, let's compare and contrast the AR-70 and AR-70-90. I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but just to go over things I've said in the past about the original AR-70. Way back in 1963, Beretta, Italy, and SIG, Switzerland, were working together to design what was at the time a very new type of rifle, firing the new 223 cartridge, only recently seen in the Colt M16. And this project would continue for 5 years, resulting in the SG 530-1 prototype series. But in 1968, SIG and Beretta broke up. Of course, Beretta says it was SIG's fault they left. They did have a disagreement over the operating system, and they both would go their own ways. Interestingly, they would kind of have very parallel tracks. In the 1970s, SIG would introduce the SG 540, which would eventually evolve into the 541. And Beretta would work on their 223 rifle, and in 1972 first introduce it as the AR-70, and they would submit it to the Special Commission for trials for the Italians, and it would go through and be accepted. However, only a handful of Italian units would actually use it. That's because the BM59, along with its many variants, wasn't that old. However, there were some Italian units, for example, the Navy's battalion that basically did marine operations, and the Air Force's security forces, and kind of the military police, the Knox. they were still using old M1 Grands, M1 carbines, even MAB machine guns, submachine guns. They really needed something new. And so they would adopt these and kind of run with them. Beretta would also have reasonably good export with these, selling quantities to Jordan, Indonesia, Malaysia, and even some small quantities to Egypt, who would have their special forces. That's because in 1972, there were not that many 223 guns that were not the M16 available. And this one had some neat features. Like the SIG, which if you watch my channel, I know you know, this uses a long stroke gas piston with the spring located around it up here. Has a 2-lug rotating bolt, fixed charging handle. It uses a paddle style mag release because it used proprietary mags. There was no such thing as a STANAG compatible back then. And so these kind of resemble Galil mags or AK mags, if you will, rock and lock, but they do have bolt hold open, as you see. It also has a little dust cover here, which is kind of neat. It's that ghost again. And it has a relatively modern fiberglass reinforced nylon type stock. It has a pistol grip that's quite ergonomic for the day with a storage compartment. And it has a similar handguard. It does have a mount, a proprietary mount on top of the receiver, along with rear sights adjustable 250 and 400 meters. And this one has flip up rear and front grenade sights that also work as a gas cutoff for firing standard 22mm grenades here. Flash rider. That's the only adjustment for the gas system. And we have this bipod, very similar to the BM59s. Yeah. Flipping it over to its other side, you can see a relatively small fire mode selector on the left here. It had safe, semi, and full auto. We do have a bolt release button as well there. And it uses what we would think of as a standard NATO bayonet lug. It essentially used the same type of bayonet as the later BM59s, which is actually based on the 1950s US M4 bayonet. Adjustable front sight. Again, all pretty standard stuff. It was right at 39 inches long. The standard barrel was about 17.7 inches. And it was a little under 8.5 pounds loaded. And while it had Beretta's typical high quality, it was made with a lot of welding and stamped components, so it was made to be economical to produce. It even had kind of a paint over treated metal, phosphating type finish instead of, more traditional bluing. That was the standard AR70. There was also the SC, Special Carbine 70. That was the exact same gun, but it had rubber and polymer coated folding metal stock in place of the fixed here. And there was also a shortened carbine version called the SCS 70. It was much like the SC 70, but it had a 14.2 inch barrel, so it was about 3.5 inches shorter, a little bit lighter, closer to 8 pounds. And it could not launch rifle grenades, although I think there were adapters so it could mount an underbarrel grenade launcher. These could take a US 203 launcher if they needed to. But only those 3 units really used them inside Italy, and then, about half a dozen nations purchased them in somewhat numbers throughout the 1970s. But mostly they were happy with the BM59. That is until 1980. After a couple of years of trials and testing, the NATO members would adopt a 62 grain projectile, first developed in Belgium, kind of replacing the original 55 grain And this was important because it basically required new guns for everyone. They had been using 1 in 12 twist in most guns. The new projectile really needed 1 in 7, at least 1 in 9. This is when we have things like the M16A2 in the USA. And since Italy never really fully went for the original AR70, that left them wide open to announce trials for the next standard issue infantry gun for the Army, as well as the Navy, Police, Air Force, what have you. Just kind of a jack of all trades. They had held off, and it actually worked out much in their favor. And so Beretta went to work improving the AR70. In 1985, the initial first prototypes came out. 86, they were more refined prototypes. And in 1988 and 1989, these would be submitted for trials at the attorney arsenal. And it would go up against 2 Italian guns, but they were basically licensed copies of other nations. For example, there was one that was a licensed copy and derivative of the HKG-41, and there was another that was a licensed copy of the IMI Galil. But the Beretta was still doing well. They also wanted to have a variant of the Colt M16 to participate, but things went south because of legal and other issues. The Colt's Italian representative essentially screwed the pooch. So, in 1990, the improved AR-70 was officially adopted as the AR-70-90, and that kind of meant the older guns were retroactively named the AR-70-223, just to distinguish them more. These had the 1 in 12 twist, and these would have 1 in 7. But the differences were far from just a different twist rate in the barrel. And this would go on to be standard issue with over 100,000 in the Italian armed services. So let's look at it, see how it's different and the same. So now let's give the 7090 a chance on its very similar but actually very different bipod. Okay, the biggest thing, and the one that often gets most repeated, rightfully so, this is compatible with standard AR-15, M16, Colt pattern magazines. And quite interestingly, it has an ambidextrous mag release, so a button on each side. Kind of neat for 1990. I think the reason they did it was because the AR-70 had the paddle release, which is effectively ambidextrous, and they didn't want to lose a feature going to the 7090. And while it'll pretty much accept any standard mag, the mags that Beretta made for these are steel, not alloy. Actually quite similar to the steel mags used by the ARX160 today, but with the older style follower. They do of course have a last round hold open, and of course they're straight in as opposed to kind of rock and lock. Another very obvious feature is the carry handle. And what's even neater about this, so I do here on camera, finger under there. This one is stiff. One moment. Okay. Lest you think I'm that incompetent. I mean, I'm incompetent, but not that bad. I did actually practice on the other one. I had 2 of these built, one for someone else, and it popped right off. This one's tighter. But the carry handle is removable. Press the button. And it has a dovetail mount and a pin that goes into the sight base back here. That's actually very reminiscent of what Switzerland would use on the STGW-90. Like the AR-70, it has a 250 and 400 meter flip rear sight. But now we have a more standard kind of Weaver base, and these were used for like Zeiss night sights or later pick rail adapters to take, say, an ACOG, 4-power ACOG, or if they were going red dot, they tended to prefer aim points. Just, mount a pick rail on. And the carry handle also has kind of snap CQB sights built into the top as well. It's metal. It is a neat system. But again, it's very much like what Switzerland is on about. See? Goes on and is quite very secure. Another noteworthy thing, as I said with the 70, we just had a gas cutoff for grenade launching. This has that, of course, but it also has a gas regulator. Just 2 positions. You have standard gas and adverse or fully open. Kind of like the Swiss gun, yet again. We have a very similar front end and very similar bayonet lug. And we have updated furniture that I'm going to circle back to in a minute. Flipping it over, here is the mag catch on this side. And here's our selector. Notice it's much larger. And now we have a total of 4 positions. Now this is a semi-auto, so only safe and semi. But in a military gun, you would have safe, single shot, burst, and full auto. Although there were various options to restrict it to only burst or only full auto, kind of customizable. The main thing was it was an ambidextrous selector and with a much larger toggle. And we also have a drop-down trigger guard for use with winter gloves. But what's kind of neat, there's a little stud on the bottom, and that actually connects with a small cutout in the pistol grip to lock it down so it won't just go flopping around. Kind of neat. And finally, then, last kind of big thing, you'll notice the receiver is a very different shape. The AR70 is very square, very AR18, AR180. This is octagonal, or at least nearly so. There's a few reasons they did that. 1, it was easier to manufacture. 2, it worked better with the stand-in mags. But 3, it was less prone to denting and thus jamming it up. It was easier to make, and it made it more reliable, more robust. So all around an improvement. Now the AR70-90 had the same 17.7 inch barrel. Overall length was slightly longer at about 39.3 inches, and it weighed a bit more at a little under 9 pounds, about 8.8 pounds. Part of that was just the heavier receiver and a few other additions. And it had the SC7090, same gun with the folding stock. And we had the SCS7090, folding stock, and a short 14.2 inch barrel. And finally, there was a variant of the SCS7090 made for the Italian paratroopers. There was the SCP7090, and it had a kind of unique attachment that would go on and allow them to fire rifle grenades and, I believe, mount a bayonet as well. So that's kind of the broad strokes. But the devil is in the details, so let's bring the 70 back out. So far we've looked at differences that I knew before getting an AR70-90 kit and a gun. But let's talk about some that aren't really, well, talked about. Now the buttstocks at first do appear very similar, and they are. Although the polymer is a little updated, we also have a bit of a hump on the back. Kind of reminds me of an FAL stock. But this has a ribbed metal butt plate. This actually has a rubber recoil pad. Not very thick or soft, but it's there. So it's an improvement. The pistol grips, again, look similar at first. But actually, This is a little bit beefier. It flares out at the bottom, whereas this one is pretty much straight. It has a little bit of a bump at the very bottom. This one is a more gradual thing. And also the compartment, both of them have a storage compartment inside, but this one is much easier to access, and it is a more comfortable pistol grip. And the handguard, actually it attaches very similar, but it's a totally different shape. And this one actually lets the bipod rest more integrated, whereas this one kind of protrudes out more. And this is very much a 70s feeling polymer, whereas this almost feels modern. Almost. And the bipods themselves are different. This one has screws that hold it on. The 7090 actually has a QD throw lever right here. Right there. So it is very easy to unclamp. This can still use the US 203 grenade launcher. And the front end is almost identical. Yeah. For 22mm rifle grenades. The differences in sighting we've already talked about. Now the AR70's charging handle does reciprocate and it comes straight out to the side. The 90's is very similar, although it has more of a shape to it, kind of an hourglass shape, and it's upswept, kind of like a Galil charging handle. It's not really useful with the carry handle on, but you might be able to reach over if it's not there, or maybe reach, I don't know, behind. So that's something you don't hear talked about. Another thing, the 70 has a manual dust cover. When this comes back, this springs open. This has an automatic, a sliding dust cover back here. It's still sealed up, but it moves with the bolt. That's pretty neat. Kind of not the same system, but same concept as what you see on the FNC. Here's that enlarged selector on the right. Notice there's really nothing hanging out on the left here. Paddle release. The AR70 mags are fine. For early 70s, there was no standard, so why not? But yeah, StanAg is an improvement. I think we can agree with that. Not really much more to see on the other side. They both have a takedown pin in the back with kind of a hole in it for a bullet tip. The front is a little different. It still comes down, has a washer. This has a pin in it. It's worth pointing out that this part was cut on the parts kit for the lower, so it had to be re-welded. Annoying, but what do you do? So that's a little bit different, the front pivot pin, and of course the lower is quite a bit different. Still stamped steel though. And the front sling loop, it's more of a curved piece of wire on the 70, and it's more of a machined loop on the 7090. Little differences, nothing crazy. And the front sight base is only slightly different. So those are kind of the differences that jump out at me. Also different slings. The 70 had a standard 2-point sling with the hook. The 7090 had a 3-point sling that I'm sure I don't have rigged up right. I hate this sling. I don't like 3 points, but I put it on for the video. Kind of a transitional. The whole system is heavier. That's probably its only real downside to the original 70, but it definitely feels more robust. Another interesting thing, this is a parts kit build. US barrel, US receiver, used parts. Whereas this is an actual import made by Beretta in Italy in the 80s. Now, when these came in, the AR70S or AR70 223S, they did not have the grenade sight, they didn't have the bipod, but you could add them. So, in its own way, it's a kit gun too. Luckily, AR70 223 kits have been available in the past in the USA. Now, this video isn't really about shooting, and that's why I'm not really talking about the build yet. I want to shoot it first. seems only honest. But we can do a little dry fire, a little function check, and see how an original gun and a kit build kind of feel together. How about that? And then we'll wrap things up. Now, since it's just me here, this isn't exactly going to be what we would consider must-see TV, but I'll do my best. I have shot this gun, and it is a good and a really fun shooter, and stacks up well against my Swiss guns, frankly, because it's a very similar operation. This gun has a very, very nice and smooth feeling bolt. The trigger is clean, smooth, but military heavy, if that makes sense. No grit, no grime, but it seems like it's necessarily heavy, like intentionally heavy. But and again, we have a manual dust cover and all that. So, what about the 70-90? Have I mentioned I don't like big heavy slings that actually grab the camera and pulled it over? Anyway. So, I do like the new angle of the charging handle, and having the automatic cover is nice. By necessity, it's not as smooth as the pre-band. That could just be the new finish on the upper receiver. It's one of those kind of wear-in things. One gun is nearly 40 years old, and the other one is about a week old. But it is solid feeling and has a good spring in it. And the trigger is equally nice and smooth, but heavy. I will say too, I've tried 10 different mags in this, and they all went in fine, and they all held open on an empty. So I'll try more mags later, but so far so good on the mag fitment. Also, the upper to lower fit is extremely secure. There's no wiggle wobble, and as we already talked about, the handle on top, it does have a little bit of welding visible, but even military guns sometimes show that. Heck, even Swiss guns sometimes do. All in all, while it's not quite as smooth as my pre-band, it feels damn solid. And I am quite excited to get it out to the range. So far, I'm suitably impressed. But the proof is in how it handles at the range. So my plan is to bring this out with a selection of mags and ammo types, and bring this out as kind of a control, because I know it works fine. It's like 95, 96 out, but we'll get it done, because that's, what we're here for. But this will be the first video. I just really got it today and wanted to share. I will do the shooting video with more commentary after that. And then I don't think I can resist doing an Italian family reunion video. Get out the BM59s and the ARX again, and yeah, that sounds fun when I've got a weekend to spare. But I kind of told you this kit came in and we would be getting it built up, and it finally happened. Of course, the events of 2020 and 2021 delayed everything, but it's done now. And yeah, shooting it is our next big step. So wish us luck. If you would, please do like, share, and subscribe. You know the drill. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha, and hopefully I'll be catching you very soon at the range next time.